This is part 3 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 2 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 2, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will disassemble the Jacobs chuck and start the disassembly of the motor. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Alright, so to disassemble that Jacobs chuck, you need to have those jaws extended about 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to use a socket over them to protect them. And then I'm using an old sleeve from a Jacobs chuck, but a pipe with an inside diameter of the outside diameter of the chuck body will work just fine. And all we're going to do is push the sleeve of the chuck towards the bottom or towards the jaws. And whatever pipe or sleeve you're using to push the chuck sleeve, it needs to be long enough that you're not going to be pushing on the safety lock collar. And it's a little tricky when you're using another sleeve because it wants to lock into place where this one is disengaging from. And I think what I'm going to do is put this in the opposite direction inside the vise. If I can get it all squared away here. All right. And we've pushed it about 1/4 inch, but it needs to go another 1/4 inch or so that the sleeve completely releases from the chuck. I'm just making sure everything's lined up. And there it goes. So you've got the sleeve, and then the chuck body, and on it you have the split nut, and then all 3 of the jaws. So if you want to know more about how to disassemble, assemble, install, and uninstall the Jacobs chuck, I'll put a link for my chuck omnibus video here. So it is possible to remove that safety lock collar from the chuck body as well, but the retaining ring that holds the 2 parts together is a real pain in the butt to get to. I'm not going to mess with it. So there's the main components, and we will head back over to the table. So now we're going to remove the model number panel off of the base. So we just need to flip the base over. It's held on by 2 drive screws. And we're just going to use a small punch to pop those drive screws through the base. And that will release that panel. You can see all those dirt dauber nests in there, or whatever they are, insect nest of some sort. There's our panel. All right, here we are with the motor. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the motor mount from the motor. And this should have 4, but this one only has 3 screws with square nuts to hold it in place. And once I get it all squared away here, I can start to loosen those. And they've got a carriage bolt, a washer, and a nut. And we'll probably just replace all that with new hardware when we get to installing the motor. Alright, so now the mount should come away from the motor base. There we go. So next we're going to remove that capacitor cover and the capacitor. And it has just 2 screws that are holding it on. And Craftsman makes another version of this motor. This is a general purpose motor. Half horsepower, 1725 RPMs, I believe. Might be 1750, but I think it's 1725. That capacitor is kind of in there. You got to just work it out. They've got another version of this motor that has sleeve bearings instead of ball bearings. I prefer the ball bearings. And there it goes. There's your cover. There's the capacitor. And at this point, I'm just going to mark the capacitor with a Sharpie and mark each one of those leads so we can put it all back together exactly as it is now. So they're just connected by spade terminals. And the capacitor may or may not be a polarized capacitor, but if I put it all back together exactly like it is now, it will work. There's your capacitor. So this motor was actually from 1997. So not the original motor that the previous owner had with this drill press at one point, but that motor must have burnt out and he ended up buying this much later. Because we know that the drill press was built in 1967. Alright, so now we're just going to remove the pulley off of the motor shaft. You've got that set screw. And we're just going to check to see if we can pop it off of there. Yep. No problems. And then we've got that key that we need to get out of the shaft. We'll just use a screwdriver to lift it up. Like so. Alright, so I don't know what I was thinking here. We're not going to remove those long screws just yet. In the parts diagram for this motor, they're called Stator screws. But we'll pull that one off of there and then we're going to move on. We're not going to remove all of them at one time. Alright, so here we are on the terminal end of the motor. And we will remove the terminal cover. And again, we have the owner's manual for this motor linked in the description of the video. And that owner's manual is pretty comprehensive. It has the wiring diagram as well as complete parts breakdown. And this motor was also built by Emerson, so kind of cool. So there's a how to reverse the rotation of the motor, as well as a high voltage and a low voltage wiring schematic on the back side of that terminal cover. So now we'll just remove the power cable, starting with the ground. And then each one of those leads has a spade terminal on it. I'm kind of just looking at what all we got going on inside there. So there is a paper wiring diagram as well inside there. And you'll see it once we get it out of there. There it is. Kind of cool that all this is still with the motor. All right, so now we'll just disconnect the various wires we've got going on here. You may or may not be able to tell, but each wire is somewhat a different color, and the wiring diagram specifies the wire colors. So as long as you can tell what color the wires are, hooking this motor up should not be an issue. So I'm going to mark every single wire that I disconnect and where it came from. Even though we've got the wiring diagram, I just want to make sure that we don't run into any issues when we go to reassemble all this stuff. And there is a good amount of sawdust and insect nesting inside the motor as well. I think I'm realizing that I marked the power cable incorrect. That should be a 4. Yeah. All right, continuing. I'm just making sure that we're not going to miss anything here. And these wires are, they're not as brittle as like the motors from the 40s and the 50s, but they are not super flexible either. And I don't want to take any chance to break them or bend them in a way that causes the shielding on them to come off. So it's probably a result of our lovely weather here in Georgia. And these were in a barn. This entire drill press was in a barn. So but nothing crazy here, just, you know, like I said, disconnecting the wires and then marking them on where they came from. Probably could have sped up through all this footage, but whatever. All right, I think that's all of them. So now we can remove those stator screws, or the long screws, or the through bolts. Just depends on what owner's manual you're looking at for whatever motor. So there are 4 of them. And we've already removed the first one. That was the second one. And there's your third one. And then the fourth one. So we are going to repaint all this stuff, and that Craftsman crown logo that you can see on the stator right now, I'm probably not going to try to remove it. I'm going to probably just mask over it. I could get another one. I could have Matte Blast from the Garage Journal make up one for me, but I think we'll just end up masking over that one when we go to paint. So here I'm just tapping the end bell or end frame or end cap, depending on what motor you're looking at, what they call it, to get a little bit of a space between it and the stator. So towards the top of the screen is the terminal end, and this is what pretty much every motor owner's manual I've looked at calls the other end. Once we've got it splitting away from the stator, then we can use a puller to get it off of there. Now I like to take the other end off first, and about 80% of the time, then we can pull the rotor out of the motor, but we'll see what happens here. So we're just going to use a 2-prong puller and pull that end shield, end frame, end bell off of the motor. Just like so. And inside there's a spring washer. You'll see me pull it out. And that is going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. In part 4, we'll finish with the disassembly of the motor, and I will see you next time.